B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, March 23rd, 2020. Trump's at it again. After watching a Fox News show on Sunday, he picked up the idea that the economy is more important than American human beings. And he wants to change the isolation rules as soon as a week from today. Now, this is grossly negligent and irresponsible, but it shows what the priorities are of Trump and the Republican Party. And the same priorities are reflected in the debate in the Senate, which, as far as I know, has not yet led to any kind of a bill to bail out corporations and allow a little money to trickle down to Americans. So first to the Trump problem. He insists on being the front man for the administration's response. He continues to misinform Americans, to play the victim, to divert and deflect blame to the media. And this is truly astounding. So last night he was watching the Fox News channel, and the host there, who I've never heard of, his name is Hilton, he said, "We can't let the cure be worse than the problem itself." And as you know, Trump was shamed into announcing a 15-day period of sheltering in place. It's not mandatory, according to Trump. States have had a little bit heavier hand. And so what we're seeing is that Fox is calling the tune here for Trump and valuing the economy ahead of trying to limit the damage and the fatal damage of this pandemic. So Steve Hilton is the guy, and on his Sunday show, he urged the federal government to flatten the coronavirus curve, but not the economy, before it's too late. Hilton used the same medical analogy that Trump did in a tweet. You know that famous phrase, "the cure is worse than the disease"? So Trump's tweet, quote, "We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. At the end of the 15-day period, we will make a decision as to which way we want to go." Now, this is a premature ejaculation of the sickest kind. And when you see that Trump is advised by all kinds of experts, including Tony Fauci, but he chooses to listen to a guy I've never heard of. I've never seen Steve Hilton. But he comes from Fox, and he prefers corporations over people. And get this, Steve Bannon was on another Fox show, Maria Bartiromo's show, and he said, "My recommendation is to drop the hammer. Don't mitigate the virus. Don't spread the curve. Shatter the curve and go full hammer on the virus right now with a full shutdown." Now, I don't have a lot of regard for Steve Bannon, but he is spewing rational thinking there. And even Lindsey Graham, who, of course, is too timid to challenge his president directly, he tweeted, "When it comes to how to fight the pandemic, I'm making my decisions based on healthcare professionals like Dr. Fauci and others, not political punditry." Well, good for you. Maybe Rand Paul's positive test result and the fact that he got the results after he worked out in the Senate's gym on Sunday morning, maybe that put a little fear into Lindsey Graham. Now, officials have said that this initial 15-day period is vital to slowing the spread of the virus, and it ends a week from today. And Fauci has said he believes it'll take several more weeks until people can start going about their lives in a more normal fashion. And I actually think that that is optimistic, because the number of cases continues to multiply in this country, and with the lack of adherence to the social distancing recommendations by too many people, the ignorance of many Trump followers who just think this is no big deal? And even good old Mike Pence, the bobblehead who Trump has put in charge of addressing the pandemic, he said, well, you know, we've got to allow some people to resume working outside their homes, but that's if they wear masks. Now, there aren't any goddamn masks even for medical professionals who are responding to this and in contact, or at least in close proximity, to carriers of the virus. And the idea that people can resume working if they wear these surgical masks or even one of the 95s or a 100 that's supposed to block out anything, this is just wishful thinking. And it shows the calculation is that people are not worth as much as the economy. And the economy is significant because Trump feels that he might lose in November even to a schlub like Joe Biden if the economy doesn't recover. So Tony Fauci is actually getting a little bit more courageous in his public statements. One of the videos that one of my Facebook friends put up was a 4-second clip from the Trump performance in the press room on Friday. And when Trump was offering these blue sky projections of drugs that are not tested for this virus, they have unknown efficacy and known side effects, Trump doesn't care. He's peddling hope. And he will grasp at anything that produces the optics that he's looking for. So in that scene, Fauci is seen covering his head as he kind of tilts down in disgust. And he touched himself on the face, which is a violation of the recommendations that Dr. Fauci himself has made. And I think that shows just how embarrassed and troubled he was by that. So on Sunday, Science Magazine's John Cohen got an interview with Fauci and asked what it's like to stand in front of the nation as the representative of truth and facts when things are being said that aren't true and aren't factual. And Fauci said, there's only so much I can do. Quote, I can't jump in front of the microphone and push him down. Okay, he said it. Let's try and get it corrected for the next time. But frankly, for an average viewer, will there be a next time? Will they hear the next Trump performance? And my friend Ford Green shared with me the idea of narcissistic supply, and Trump was cut off from it because he can't hold these mob rallies anymore with his MAGA hat idiots. Well, he's getting his narcissistic supply from these news conferences. And yesterday I had CNN on midday just to get an update, and they said, tune in at 4:30 Eastern Time. Trump's going to hold a news conference. And I chose to take a nap instead. He apparently rambled on for an hour and a half. And perhaps due to an opinion piece published in the New York Times on Sunday by Jennifer Senior, she's been a White House correspondent. The headline reads, "Call Trump's news conferences propaganda," and she was suggesting that the networks cut off his narcissistic supply. They can run tape on his rambling and bring us the highlights and the lowlights. There are plenty of the latter. And in fact, two of the networks, I believe ABC and CBS, reportedly pulled away at some point while NBC aired the entire session. We'll just leave it at that. So back to Fauci. He said, drawing a laugh, to my knowledge, I haven't been fired. But he knows that Trump is temperamental, that Trump grates whenever Fauci corrects him publicly, and his days certainly could be numbered. Cohen also pressed Fauci on Trump making statements that don't comport with facts. including the misleading suggestion that China could have revealed details of the outbreak 3 or 4 months earlier. I know. But what do you want me to do? Fauci responded. I mean, seriously, John, let's get real. What do you want me to do? And after Trump made a remark about China at Saturday's briefing, Fauci said he informed the appropriate people about the inaccuracy. The next time they sit down with him and talk about what he's going to say, they'll say, by the way, Mr. President, be careful about this and don't say that. And he said on other issues, he said, I keep saying, particularly because, Trump insists on the backdrop, the human backdrop of Fauci and Pence and Dr. Burke, and that violates the social distancing rules. And he said, well, that's a bit more problematic. I keep saying, is there a way we can get a virtual news conference? So far, no. But when you're dealing with the White House, sometimes you have to say things 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then it happens. So I'm going to keep pushing. And a quick note about Fox News and the Steve Hilton show. According to Ben Smith, writing in the New York Times, he, of course, is recently departed from BuzzFeed News, where he was the chief editor there. And he said, for 2 crucial weeks in late February and early March, powerful Fox hosts talked about the real story of the coronavirus, a Democratic, media-led plot against President Trump. Hosts and guests speaking to Fox's predominantly elderly audience repeatedly played down the threat of what would soon become a deadly pandemic. And who is responsible? Well, nominally, a woman named Suzanne Scott, who had no experience running a newsroom, much less a news network. She was promoted after the Roger Ailes debacle, and she had been a legal counsel to Fox News. And she reports to Lachlan Murdoch, who is the son of Sir Keith Rupert Murdoch, the media mogul, who owns Fox and some newspapers and all kinds of other stuff. And he apparently doesn't watch the network very much and waits for other people to alert him about what kind of bullshit they're peddling. It's reported that Lachlan has delegated much of the running of the company to a high-powered Republican lawyer named Viet Din, D-I-N-H. Without much experience in the media business, he earned more than $24 million in salary and stock last year. Meanwhile, the battle continues in the U.S. Senate, and Mitch McConnell is proving his skill as a demagogue. Now, there appear to be some elements in this $1 trillion or $2 trillion package that they are wrangling over right now that Democrats have inserted and that infuriate Republicans because they're not directly related to this current crisis. But the big picture is that McConnell presented a bill that was almost 90% written by Republicans. It was not unveiled for the senators to review until a couple of hours before they were expected to vote to end debate on it. And the Democrats are rightly outraged that McConnell is trying to jam this through by saying that the American people need help. But it is so lopsided in favor of corporations. It has very little regulation on the money that's passed out, how it's used. This is essentially a gift to these companies. $500 billion for corporate bailouts that the Democrats are correctly calling a slush fund. And this whole sordid process reminds me of the fall of 2008. The Bush Wall Street collapse was well underway. And Hank Paulson, who was then the Secretary of the Treasury, he was a Wall Street alum, Goldman Sachs, if I'm not mistaken. And he basically sent a one-page ransom note to Nancy Pelosi. And it was a demand for cash for him to just pass out to his friends in the banking and related industries to try to prevent a collapse of the economy. There's very little oversight. Some of that money was ultimately used to buy back stock. When stock is bought back, the price goes up. That benefits the executives who get their free shares through the stock option plans. Now, according to language in the bill, one provision includes an exclusion of nonprofits receiving Medicaid expenditures. That appears to be aimed at Planned Parenthood, but there are many other nonprofit medical care facilities and entities that would also be blocked from receiving this money, like home and community-based disability providers, community-based nursing homes, mental health providers, rape crisis centers, group homes for the disabled. And this is what is so ugly. In the first two bills that were passed, it was Republican demands for exclusions that hollowed out the promise of the Families First Act, which doesn't apply to companies with, more than 500,000 employees? No, I think it was 500. I'm sorry, 500 employees. So this is what's going on. And Mitch McConnell is pouting and shouting and all upset because the Democrats wouldn't fall in line. And his version of compromise is you capitulate 100% to our position, and then we can call it bipartisan. And today apparently got very testy, near screaming matches in the Senate chambers. And I want to just make a quick note. We don't even know the extent of the cost to corporate America from the shutdown that is generally underway across the country. Corporations enjoy what is called limited liability. That's how the whole system is set up. And the proper way to deal with this is when they hit the wall, when they run out of cash, because they squandered it on stock buybacks and raises for executives, but not the rank and file. The proper method is to go into bankruptcy. And there they can sort out, discharge certain debts, restructure. And if the government wants to offer them bailout money at that point, it's a much more reasonable process. And so McConnell has this false sense of urgency. And he lectures his colleagues, this has got to stop, and today is the day it has to stop. The country is out of time. Accept this flawed legislation, or we're going to make the Democrats out to be the bad guys. So on Sunday, Democrats refused a cloture vote, that's to end debate, that would have brought the package to the floor today. And here's McConnell's complaint. Democrats are filibustering programs to keep people on the payroll. They're filibustering a huge expansion of unemployment insurance, which they themselves negotiated and put into the bill. Because he's just so concerned about the little people. And Schumer said, we have an obligation. He's the Democratic leader in the Senate. We have an obligation to get the details right, get them done quickly. That doesn't mean blindly accepting a Republican-only bill. The heated debate led Tom Cotton, right-wing nut from Arkansas, to exclaim, this is bullshit. And Susan Collins, a little bit family-friendly, this is unbelievable. And even Joe Manchin, who's barely a Democrat from West Virginia, got into it with McConnell, who then lectured Manchin about Senate process. So, as we understand it, the package is still one-time payment of $1,200 to most adults, but the language is that essentially if your household income was about $75,000 last year, you would get the full $1,200. If your household income was only $40,000, you will get some number less than $1,200. And this is perverse because the households with lower incomes need more money than those with higher incomes. That's just a fundamental. But that's not the way Republicans think. And so, while I have my problems with the Democrats, in this moment, they appear to be standing firm. The efforts of Elizabeth Warren to put restrictions on the bailout money, I think, are significant, and I support her on this. And we'll see how it plays out. Here's today's COVID-19 news update, compiled by Linda Lewis with my true gratitude. Here are the numbers. The CDC reports 33,404 total confirmed presumptive positive cases and 400 deaths to date in the United States. In New York, Governor Cuomo said that the caseload has topped 15,000, death toll 114. Washington State, second most confirmed cases, 1,800 with 94 deaths. California, 1,500 cases, 28 fatalities. And worldwide, we're closing in on 300,000 confirmed cases, 12,784 deaths. The Italian embassy has moved to quell fears after the health minister of the United Kingdom, Nadine Dorries, claimed that Italy has stopped intubating patients over 60. The Italian embassy has denied it. In Colombia, prison riots prompted by fears of the coronavirus left at least 23 inmates dead and 83 injured. In Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel has tested negative, but she had met with her doctor on Friday who has tested positive. So she has gone into seclusion. Meanwhile, the struggle to get our frontline medical personnel, doctors, nurses, and others, adequate protective materials, masks, gloves, and gowns, continues to be a real struggle. And instead of responding to the urgent calls from governors across the country for the federal government to coordinate the acquisition and delivery of these important items, Trump prefers to trade insults on Twitter. So J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, was on TV and said, we're all competing against each other. This should have been a coordinated effort by the federal government. We are paying higher prices because there's a frenzy out there with a lot of demand. So Pritzker said that Trump ought to get off Twitter and do his job. And, of course, Trump could not resist tweeting back that Pritzker and other governors shouldn't be blaming the federal government for their own shortcomings. And what is bizarre to me is that Trump's bluster and bullying appears to be strength to the cultists who follow him. I don't have time for it today, but over the weekend I had some bizarre exchanges with people on Facebook who are putting up posts about what a great job their president is doing. And despite the evidence to the contrary that's right in front of most Americans, they prefer to believe the fantasies promoted by their president. Now, one of the big issues is whether the president will or actually has used the law that allows him to order industries to produce necessary products in this emergency. And the president has said that he has invoked the law, but that was contradicted by the head of FEMA, Peter Gaynor, who was on television dodging questions. He refused to give a number of how many masks and gowns and other equipment have been put into circulation and dispatched to the states. He just talked about how, we're doing it every day and, everything's fine and blah, blah, blah. And by refusing to use the Defense Production Act, Trump pretends that by threatening to invoke it, he can get industry to do what he wants without actually doing it. And, at least to date, that has proven to be flatly false. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, continues to show strong leadership. I respect that over the course of 48 hours last week, he shifted from a 50% workplace or workforce reduction to an order for all people to stay at home, to shelter in place. He is reporting 10,356 confirmed coronavirus cases in New York State, 6,211 in New York City. He said about 40 to 80% of the state's population is going to be infected by the virus. That's a range of 8 to 16 million people in the Empire State. Louisiana has the fastest growth rate of cases in the whole world, according to its governor, John Bel Edwards, in a news conference on Sunday. And here in California, it's pretty frustrating because 90% of the people are honoring the request to take these precautions, to shelter in place. But there are a lot of people who've been out at the beaches, running around in state parks, and they are not isolating themselves, even the 6-foot distance that's recommended. I've linked to a video posted at The Guardian today, which is a series of clips of mayors in various towns in Italy, some out on the streets, ordering people to go home, others who shoot videos in their offices, screaming at their constituents to follow the orders. You're hearing a mayor who's telling people to get away from this seaside ping pong table and to go home and play with your PlayStation.
Dove andate con questi cani che hanno la prostata infiammata? Dovete stare a casa.
You need to stay at home. People are dying. Don't you get it?
Volete far ammalare tutti. Siete degli irresponsabili.
You are irresponsible idiots, colossal idiots. So you get the flavor. Follow the link because in addition to hearing the Italians yell, there is a translation of what they are saying, and you may find that amusing or even interesting. The maker of the drug that Trump has been promoting, remdesivir, that's Gilead Sciences, based here in San Francisco area. They have now pulled it away from even compassionate use because there's been an exponential increase in requests, and they want to put it through clinical trials so they can honestly see if it really works. And for a pharmaceutical company, and Gilead's the one that charges $60,000 a year for its Hep C drugs, well, this is a very different approach, and I respect it. Chinese officials appear to be arguing about the claim that was made by one government spokesman that the U.S. owes China an explanation, and suggesting that it was American soldiers who went to a sporting competition in Wuhan in October last year who might have introduced the virus to China. And in the coverage of this, the New York Times refers to it as a conspiracy theory. Now, I think it is a theory. I think it deserves to be investigated. I don't believe that our government is beyond reproach or above a dastardly deed as the Chinese suggest. It also could be flat-out Chinese propaganda. But to tag it as a conspiracy theory before it has been investigated, that's yellow journalism. Oh, and here is the height of irony for today. Headline: Trump officials weigh reopening Obamacare enrollment over coronavirus. Well, here in California, we have an enrollment period underway, and it has just been extended by the state Obamacare exchange. It's got a name. I can't summon it right now. And as you may know, I have referred to our friend Rose, who was a passenger on the Grand Princess. She went to Hawaii, and on the way back, they made the ship hover offshore for 4 or 5 days. It came into Oakland 2 weeks ago today. And so the quarantine period, the 14-day, is starting to expire today and throughout this week. And Rose, who has tested negative for the coronavirus, has been told that she will be released tomorrow. And I don't know why, but Governor Newsom was trying to speed up the release, let people go home earlier, and transportation complications prevented that. They have to figure out how to get these people to their homes or arrange for somebody to come and pick them up, and there aren't too many Uber drivers eager to take on that particular request. Oh, and here's the second height of irony for today. Headline, Trump offers Kim Jong-il antivirus support in a letter. Yeah, he's going to export his genius response to the challenges that he has failed to face so far. And he is not extending that same offer to any of our allies, including the hardest hit in Italy. And as we'll get to a little later, there's continuing discussion, argument in the White House about whether to hammer Iran even more despite its crippling coronavirus outbreak. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. I want to thank William Silverman for his new $5 a month subscription. He is joined by Jason Ferguson, Peter Hoffmeister. They each chip in $5 a month. And Chris Stubblefield just renewed an annual subscription. Thank you very much, Chris. And if you'd like to join them, all you have to do is visit peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber, and you can select a PayPal subscription that fits your budget. And if you're allergic to PayPal, you can always communicate with me at my post office box, number 150-660, San Rafael, zip code 94915 here in California. Now, I want to say that my Facebook feed has a fairly steady flow of people who think that the coronavirus is hyped, that it is being used to clamp down on our constitutional rights, our freedom of movement. And I share those concerns, but I haven't reached a point where I believe things have gone too far. We don't have martial law here in California. There is, the cops will come and tell you to get off the golf course. But there are no checkpoints. The military is not deployed on the streets. The National Guard has been called up provisionally to help with relief efforts and to build field hospitals. But I'm quite vigilant, and I will continue to be so. It is alarming that Bill Barr, who plays Attorney General in this administration, a deeply corrupt guy who presides over our law enforcement apparatus, well, they've asked Congress to craft legislation allowing chief judges to indefinitely hold people without trial, to suspend other constitutionally protected rights. Now, they have to go through Congress, and I don't think Nancy Pelosi will entertain these ideas, but the fact that they've surfaced them is similar to what happened after 9/11. We're going to pass a Patriot Act. What do you got over there that you've always wanted to pass, and we'll just throw it in there, and they can't vote against it? So, Justice has requested the authority for the chief judges. It would be applicable to any statutes or rules or procedure otherwise affecting pre-arrest, post-arrest, pre-trial, trial, post-trial procedures, criminal and juvenile proceedings, and all civil processes and proceedings. They want to give judges outsized power, including locking people up and not giving them a trial. Here's a comment from the executive director of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Norman Reimer. Not only would it be a violation of habeas corpus, but it says affecting pre-arrest. So that means you could be arrested and never brought before a judge until they decide the emergency or civil disobedience is over. I find it absolutely terrifying. Especially in a time of emergency, we should be careful about granting new powers to the government. He's 100% right. Over at BillMoyers.com, a Facebook friend linked me to this podcast between Moyers and Supreme Court reporter Dahlia Lithwick. She's a very smart woman, and I have good, significant respect for her. And she commented in this exchange with Moyers, I think you can look at declarations of emergency at the border last year, where no emergency existed, just to get funding that Congress had already said they were declining to offer. The travel ban, one after another, actions taken that really pushed the boundaries of what the executive branch can do. And just the sort of dispiriting ways in which the Justice Department has doubled down on pressing some of those truly lawless actions. So we saw Bill Barr, at the highest levels of the Justice Department, interfere with the Roger Stone sentencing. And later she says, I think maybe the answer to your question is that so much of the rule of law, as it turns out, was built on soft norms, not on regulations and statutes and constitutional directives. And I think that we all think that this machinery is more robust than it really is. It turns out it's tissue thin if we don't fight for it. And I highly recommend this op-ed from a young Oxford student. He's in his 20s, Samuel Miller MacDonald. It appears in the Guardian today. He opens, as a millennial, much of my adulthood's been punctuated by several national emergencies, starting with 9/11. The government quickly responded by attempting to achieve two things. One, expanding executive power, and two, transferring public wealth into private corporations. The Bush administration achieved the first with the Patriot Act, which built the foundation for what is probably the world's most expansive surveillance state, but also by setting legal precedents that violated basic constitutional rights and creating the Department of Homeland Security with its aggressive constituent agencies like ICE and Customs and Border Protection. The second goal was achieved with the War on Terror, which involved unilateral occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq and subsequent military forays into many African countries. And he talks about the cost of that. The second national emergency my generation experienced was the 2008 housing bubble collapse. Again, the federal government under Obama sought to exploit the crisis to move vast wealth from the public treasury into private bank accounts. A staggering $14 trillion, that's an accurate figure, by the way, was transferred from taxpayers to private hands, including Wall Street executives who used that money to continue giving themselves seven-figure bonuses. Now, the federal government appears poised to exploit this emergency to expand executive power and move wealth from the public treasury into private bank accounts. There's more to the piece, and I encourage you to read it. The other thing I want to mention, just in conjunction with this, is I saw news accounts over the weekend of Sean Penn, the actor, calling for the Army to take control of the coronavirus response. Sean, what the fuck are you thinking? No, we don't need a military takeover of even a portion of the government at this point. It should be controlled by civilians. Moon of Alabama made a couple of good points in a post on March 21st. Moon notes that in January and February, the intelligence agencies knew about the danger posed by the outbreak of coronavirus. And instead of warning the public, quote, instead of leaking new idiotic fairy tales, they could have leaked a warning about the pandemic. Instead, we were given this. And he links two articles. Bernie Sanders briefed by U.S. officials that Russia is trying to help his presidential campaign. Well, they did a really shitty job. Second headline, Russia trying to stoke U.S. racial tensions before election. Third headline, how Russian election meddling is back before 2020 vote. More from Moon, if the intelligence services had taken the pandemic seriously, they could have warned the public via their countless stenographers in the media. Instead, they kept the media filled with false anti-Russian stories and told Trump that the Chinese are lying, which they were, in fact, not. A new report, which is building on the one I shared with you last week from Nature.com. This report is from LiveScience.com, which I believe is related to the Science.com entity as well. and it challenges the myth, they call it, that the new virus was made by scientists and escaped from a lab in Wuhan, China. Now, that's Trump's blame China game, at least to some extent. And they say the overall molecular structure of this virus is distinct from the known coronaviruses and instead most closely resembles viruses found in bats and pangolins that had been little studied and never known to cause humans any harm. If someone were seeking to engineer a new coronavirus as a pathogen, they would have constructed it from the backbone of a virus known to cause illness. So, again, these are speculative reports, and I feel it's important to share things that come from various perspectives. I don't pretend to know definitively where the virus came from, whether it was a bioweapon that was intentionally or accidentally released. I don't know if those American soldiers in China had anything to do with it. But we'll continue to ask the questions and hope that we get some answers. Colleen McGuire is very upset about the senators who appeared to be guilty of insider trading. They got the briefings, starting with Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr, who sold up to, $1.6 million of his holdings. She writes, I greatly appreciate you reporting on the traitorous congresspeople who sold and or bought stock relevant to the coronavirus. Also great that Tucker Carlson is calling this out regardless of his political leanings. Cheating is cheating. But guess what, she says? It seems like it's entirely legal. And she included a link to a story from a place called investmentu.com. And they point out that the laws are so loose that most of the transactions that members of Congress conduct are not prohibited by law. Even though Obama signed the Stock Act in 2012, which was attempting to crack down on white-collar crime in Washington. It instituted strict disclosure requirements for members of Congress who are buying and selling securities. The article says at first the law worked like a charm. The number of stock transactions made by congressmen plunged by half from 2011 to 2012. Those who kept trading had to post their trades to a searchable online database. But get this, just a year later, Congress amended it in a quick procedural vote. It got rid of the online disclosure requirement, and if you want to go see if your member of Congress has been trading stocks and might have, committed insider trading, you have to go to the basement of the Cannon office building and ask for a printed file. Now, the insider trading scandal here provoked a thought over the weekend from yours truly, your humble host. And that is, if we go back to mid-February, the end of February, top Democratic leaders were well aware of the dimensions of the approaching pandemic, the vulnerability of our healthcare system, the widespread loss of income by average Americans. And by the end of February, even with this knowledge, they shifted the block Bernie machinery into high gear. And they promoted the rise, or orchestrated the rise, of Joe Biden, ignoring his vulnerabilities, including the whole Ukraine Gate story that we know Trump is going to bring back to bloody him in the fall, his apparent cognitive decline, the incredible baggage that he has built up over 40 years in government service. And that's where we are today. And I want to cite an interesting front-page story from Sunday's New York Times. And they make some interesting criticisms of the Sanders campaign. The headline starts, "Mistakes and Internal Strife Hobbled Sanders Campaign." And they report that the Sanders pollster Ben Tulchin, back in January, said that his research showed that Bernie was going to do well in the first three primaries and on Super Tuesday. But he said that the vulnerabilities that Sanders has with black voters in the South were very significant. And the pollster said, it's time for you to essentially take on Joe Biden. Now, I think there are a couple of factors that the article doesn't cite. I think that coming off the caucuses in Nevada, where Bernie really cleaned up, got great Latino support, got significant but not outsized support from the young people that he was counting on, I think Bernie got a little cocky. I also agree with the New York Times article here that Sanders and his wife refused to go negative on Joe Biden because they like Joe and his wife Jill. And so Bernie refused the advice to take on Biden over his bad legislation that harmed African Americans in the 1990s, the crack cocaine deal in particular. Now, Tulchin also had a gross error because on the eve of the South Carolina primary, he was reassuring Sanders that the race was close there. And Biden took it by 30 points. They talk about how there was internal dissension. Back in January, Zephyr Teachout, the law professor from New York who'd been a candidate there, published a column in The Guardian saying that Joe Biden had a big corruption problem. And David Sirota, who I've known for a long time and is a speechwriter and advisor to the Sanders campaign, he quickly blasted out her column. But Sanders put the kibosh on it. He said, it's absolutely not my view that Joe is corrupt in any way. And the corruption problem that she cited was real. But Sanders also sidelined David Sirota at that point, said that he was barred for traveling for the campaign outside of visits to the D.C. headquarters. And Faz Shakir, my old buddy, he took the side of Sanders and said that the decision was ultimately up to Bernie. So I agree with the narrative here so far. But late in the article, they talk about the Cuba smear. Quote, and then there was Cuba. In February, Florida Democratic officials proposed conversations between Sanders and Latino leaders in South Florida, many of whom were nervous about his rhetoric on socialism and revolution. Then, they write, the day after the Nevada caucuses, CBS aired a 60 Minutes interview in which Mr. Sanders stood by his past praise for certain policies of Fidel Castro's government. They don't describe it as an intentional ambush set up by Anderson Cooper, part of the media gatekeeper team, to marginalize Sanders and weaponize the Cuba issue against him. And so I think that there is valid criticism of what brought Sanders to where he is today. It isn't over, but he needs to win about 63% of the remaining delegates to even tie Joe Biden. And that does seem to be an insurmountable challenge, given that many of these primaries have been delayed. It's impossible to campaign in the old style. And Sanders does appear to have thrown in the towel. Not admitting it, but just by moving on to the coronavirus issue, raising money for it instead of the campaign. And I want to recommend two pieces by young, muckraking reporters. Kevin Gostola at Shadowproof dug into the fundraising by the PAC supporting Joe Biden. And this was a PAC called Unite the Country. And it was funded by Republicans who have also donated maximum amounts of money to Trump, including Carlos Duarte, a Republican from Miami, Greg Wendt, a portfolio manager for Capital Group based in San Francisco. He dumped in $50,000 to this PAC on February the 5th, and he's given tens of thousands of dollars to Republicans. Lindsey Graham, Mitt Romney, Kevin McCarthy. And the list goes on. They're not all Republicans. Many of them are corporate Democrats. But it shows the orchestrated effort. And the bottom line of this is that by late January or early February, the rise of Bernie Sanders scared these people so much that they wanted to back Biden because they saw him as the Democrat easiest for Trump to beat. And at the same time, the media was circulating the whole idea that Biden was the one who Trump wanted to avoid. After all, why would he have sent Rudy Giuliani to Ukraine to dig up dirt? Well, my belief is that the Trump people felt that their dear leader's effort had been successful, that Biden was bloodied and diminished and would be the easier one to defeat in November. Li Feng, writing at The Intercept, another great young investigative reporter, peels back the veneer of the super PAC that was put together at the last minute to try to salvage the campaign of Elizabeth Warren. And you know that she said she wasn't going to rub elbows with donors. She was following Bernie. Well, she relented and allowed the super PAC to be developed. And then they trumpeted that, wow, almost overnight she'd raised $15 million. Now, let me say this again. The PAC raised it, not Elizabeth Warren. They're technically and legally separate. Well, it turns out that of the $15 million, $14.6 million came from a single donor, a woman named Carla Jurvetson, based here in Silicon Valley. Oh, my. We live in bizarre times. There's a little bit of other news in the White House. The debate goes beyond coronavirus. I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. There is a debate about whether to try to further devastate Iran through military attacks while they are grappling with the outbreak of the coronavirus. It's even infected many of the top leaders in Iran. So the hawks are Secretary of State Pompeo, Robert O'Brien, the latest national security advisor, after an attack in Iraq that could not be confirmed to be related to Iran. They nevertheless wanted to use that as a pretext for a major assault on Iran or Iranian assets. But get this, the cooler heads in the room are the former Raytheon executive, Defense Secretary Mark Esper, Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The Pentagon and intelligence agencies did not have clear evidence that the attacks had been ordered by Iran. They warned that a large-scale response could draw the United States into a wider war with Iran and rupture already strained relations with Iraq. But there's more. The debate played out in front of the president, involved Pompeo and others, arguing that limited airstrikes were more likely to perpetuate a cycle of violence than to break it. The Secretary of State, backed by the new acting Director of National Intelligence, Richard Grenell, argued that a more direct strike on Iran, such as hitting its naval vessels, could take the country by surprise, push its leaders to the negotiating table. And I believe they seriously misread the picture. Want to recommend a piece by Tim Redmond. He is a progressive journalist based in San Francisco who I've known for more than 30 years. He wrote a powerful piece about how we all need to sacrifice to get us all through this pandemic response. He says that we're doing all these different things to help people, but there's one item entirely missing. Nobody is talking about the concept that the very, very rich should pay their fair share to handle the current crisis and the lengthy recovery. And he cites the wealth of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. He says, unless I'm missing something, there's absolutely no discussion at the federal, state, or local level about raising taxes on the very rich to pay for all the massive expenses that will be required to rebuild the economy. Washington is ready to borrow another $1 trillion, and our kids are going to have to pay for that. When is anyone going to talk about the most critical economic issue in the room? When is anyone going to say that the U.S. economy won't survive without a wealth tax? Well, Tim, you make an excellent point. And finally today, my rogue utility, Pacific Gas and Electric, whose 100-year-old power lines came down in a storm and torched the city of Paradise into ashes. They have agreed to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter in connection with that fire and pay a fine of about $3.5 million. It's inadequate, but the admission adds to the length of criminal negligent acts committed by this one utility. And I'm happy to say that in the negotiations with Governor Gavin Newsom, that PG&E, in order to get his approval to exit bankruptcy, has agreed that if they don't meet certain standards within the next year, that they will allow the state to take over this troubled utility or force a sale to another operator. It's not exactly what I'm hoping for, but it's progress. And to put in writing a commitment that could lead to public ownership of PG&E, that's a big step forward. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it with absolutely everyone. You'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.